I don't count. Go ahead. I can't hear you. Smokehouse? We don't have one now, but I love smoking. That'll probably be one of the next projects we do. My big thing is if it's going to go into my stomach, I'd love to smoke it. I'll smoke just about anything. I've smoked rabbit, squirrel, pheasant. I've done deer smoke. I've done making my own hams. I mean, it's not hard. I mean, I am a big fan when it comes to smokehouse building, though, of a passive or a cold smoke. So you build a firebox off to the side, you have your smokehouse here, and you push it through pipes. I did one back before I moved here the first time, where we buried the pipes in the ground. We put the fire in a pit in the ground, and by moving the smoke through the ground and using aluminum piping, it actually even lowered the temperature of the smoke more. And we had a temperature in the smokehouse, even after it was running for a while, of about 125 degrees. And that's about as perfect as you can get, like what they call a cold smoke. But I've also done them with old refrigerators. You gut out an old refrigerator, you got all the racks in there to hang your meat from, and that's one of your big things. If you really want to smoke meat and get it to smoke uniformly and right, you don't want it sitting on a rack, you want it hanging. Whether it's sausage, whether it's a whole, try smoking whole squirrels. Take a bunch of squirrels, well, clean, obviously, and dead. They got to be dead before you smoke them. But soak them in salt water, a saltwater brine overnight, and then, basically bind their back legs together and hang them like little mini deer carcasses in a smoker. And you only have to smoke those for about 3 hours. And it's pretty awesome. It really is. Anybody else? What's that? I'm probably going to do quail. I don't know if I'm going to do them this year. The next animals coming into our new homestead are going to be geese. We have 8 Toulouse geese coming in on the 13th of April, which will make Dorothy Mother Goose. She's looking forward to having her geese. And we have some chickens right now, so that's probably all we're going to do for this part of this year. I'm pretty excited about quail, though, after we had Moon Valley Prepper on. To see the amount of quail he was raising in a one-car garage and basically in a 2-foot footprint kind of blew me away. I didn't know how prolific they were. But my plan is to do them with a fully contained quail tractor that's going to be much bigger than most people would do for a quail, so that the quail have an enclosed area, a shaded area, and a completely open area. And what I've got to figure out is how to make it easy to move a device that big without wheels, because when quail are small, I mean, they that big, they can get out of it. So that's kind of my plan for the quail. I'd like to do 100% pasture-raised quail, and I think we have weather around here where we could. That's probably a good idea. We just had a suggestion from a listener, and I just worry about, because I did this and I ended up getting one of my chickens stuck in it when they were still small enough that I had them in a tractor. Instead of using a dolly, what he did is get 2 1.5-inch pieces of PVC pipe, and you lift up the tractor and just stick it under there, and you just, like they used to move stones to build the pyramids. And it works great, but when I pushed it off, one of the chickens was kind of stupid, and he ended up with his foot underneath the tractor, and he was screaming, and I felt really bad about it. So maybe your idea is better.
Could you make a sled out of like something out like PVC or something like that where you can slide it?
Yeah.
Just drag it?
Yeah, that might work. Line the bottoms of the tractor with something slick. The other thing I've learned with tractoring already, though, is it requires fairly flat land. If you have an 8-foot-long tractor and you end up with a little bit of a dip, with smaller birds, you end up with an escape route. You kind of have to bypass those areas.
As far as that goes, could you just put like a little net around it so that way it's like a little skirt that keeps them in if you're on an uneven surface?
It might work. He's saying put a net around the bottom. The problem is they'll probably end up in that net freaking out, breaking their own necks and whatever.
This is for either you or Frank, but if you were building a remote, like a hunting camp, and you want to be off-grid, I know there's sort of a difference between either keeping it tight, keeping it energy efficient, or going with thermal mass, like a dry stack concrete. And I know dry stack works real well up in the north if you insulate the outside and all the thermal mass is conducted to the inside. Down here, like in West Texas in the hot areas, what would you recommend? What kind of building construction here?
I'll let you take a crack at this, but in West Texas, he was asking about building kind of an off-grid structure. If I was going to build anything out of dry stack concrete in West Texas, it would be covered with about 1.5 feet or more soil. Because the problem when you do anything with concrete in a climate like this is it actually does an okay job during the day, right? And at night, it just kills you. It radiates out of there, and it just absolutely kills you. If you get it into ground contact, now it works for you because it'll shed that heat and it'll actually keep a lot of it out. I'm going to let you give an answer to that, and I'm going to have you pass it to Steve because this is his whole world about keeping things cold.
I would have to really kind of think on it for a little while, being that I'm not from this area, but my first impression would be to try to get as much of it as possible below ground. I would try to go that route if the soil was such that you had the equipment necessary or the manpower to make that happen. I think that would help an awful lot. And if you couldn't, I think I would just go with something a lot lighter, a lot more airy, and more traditional is the way I tend to think of things anyhow. In a more traditional way that had been done for a long period of time, for hundreds of years. Go with something a little lighter, a little airier, a wooden structure that in which the heat and the cool left that space fairly quickly rather than crept in during the course of the evening like a solid mass would. I hope that helps a little.
The way I do it is the way they do it in Italy, Texas. If you've seen the Monolithic Dome Institute in Italy, Texas, anyone seen that going down the highway, seen the great big caterpillar named Bruno down there? The way those things, I've been down there for the $1,000 contractor course, the 5-day course, the greatest thing we've ever done. The way those domes are built is they have a form, then you spray foam on the inside, then you put a rebar, then you spray concrete in. So what you have is you have insulation and then thermal mass, and it's all in ground contact. And so I would keep that thermal mass in ground contact, as you said, dig as deep as you can go, and get in solid ground contact, have that thermal mass, and then have the insulation of any type over that. That could be foam, that could be wood, that could be grass, that could be hay bales, that could be straw, that could be almost anything you want. So when you talk about dry stack concrete, you're talking about cinder blocks? Possible. What else is it?
Brick.
Okay, concrete block. Earth, okay, yeah. Thermal mass on the inside, insulation on the outside, everything in contact with the earth, you'll love it.
And then you might want to check out the show I just did with Gene Piercy. He's also known as Evil Roy. He's a member of the Single Action Shooting Society Hall of Fame. And in his other life, he builds earth contact structures. He was on just last week. And he builds basically they build the framing, steel framing, and then they provide all the engineering and all, and then you get it installed, or you can do a lot of it yourself locally. And they build pretty small ones too, so for a bug out location in this climate, that would be ideal.
Have you done any shows on like building houses out of containers or any tiny house shows?
We never did a tiny house show. We did do a whole show on doing shipping container housing, and it's a pretty cool build the guy's doing in Oklahoma. He doesn't give his name away or anything because he wants to keep it secret, but what he basically is doing is, it's really cool, and if you just do container house, you'll find it in my search box. But the way he built this was he basically took 2 containers this way, I'm going to do it vertical, so 2 containers on one side, 2 containers on the other side, open to each other to make 2 large rooms, and then came across with 2 containers like this. So you've got a square, but 2 thick sides of the square and 2 thin sides of the square. So it's got an open roof, so it's got like an inside courtyard, like kind of a Spanish house. But then they earth walled it. They didn't cover it, they just earth walled it 360 degrees around, and they created an entryway that comes in on an S-turn. If you look at it, it just looks like a hill. It's completely earth covered, except the roofs are open, but they put a real high, that R-value insulating paint on the roofs, and they've used your trick with the irrigation going over the roof and then down onto the earth walls to keep the earth walls irrigated so that they can grow basically cover crops along that to keep it nice and green. But that, by running the irrigation water across the roof first, it helps keep it cool beyond what the thermal contact does. And that's probably the coolest one I've ever seen. He just won't really release a lot of information about it because they put a lot of money into it and they want it to not be, they don't really want you to know where it is. I can tell you it's in Oklahoma, and from there you must take it to your own,
Google Earth.
Yeah, good luck with that. Another cool way I've seen to keep housing cool, and I don't remember who I just had on that actually had done a house like this, but when we started looking for housing around here in Texas again, we started finding houses that had like a single wide trailer as like a guest house. And a lot of them had basically, it almost looked like a carport built over the trailer. And we were looking in the summer, and we went in a couple of them, and all the ones we saw, the trailers were really in bad shape. But I did have to admit, it was quite cool compared to what you would expect with no air conditioning, just the windows open. Like basically the entire house is in shade. And there was someone down near Austin, that I just had somebody on about a building show, that built a house that way. The whole thing is canopy. And it really does a good job as well. So that's another thing that you can look at with trying to keep houses cool, especially a small structure. If you basically build a dual roof with space between the roof sections, you're going to keep that